Hi and welcome to my Fabric.js tutorial. Throughout the course we will be building a project, and this will allow us to learn many of the core features of Fabric.js. So let's start by showing some of the features that we will be implementing. After creating our canvas and setting a background image, we will add the ability to draw on the canvas. We can also add our own objects such as a rectangle and circle, and play a custom animation when these objects are being added. Then we can upload our own image, and we can control it just like we would with any other object. If we wish to control all the objects in the canvas at once, we can group the objects. And we can ungroup the objects when we want to control them individually again. We also have the ability to pan to different locations of our canvas. If we wish to work on a clean slate, we can clear the canvas. And by saving the state of our canvas, we can also restore the objects we just cleared. Now, although this project will show many of the core features of Fabric.js, Fabric is quite extensive. I believe the main takeaway from this project should be the confidence to know you can figure out what you need to figure out. And this tutorial can help jumpstart that process. If at any time you wish to pause and try things out for yourself, I highly recommend it. Let's talk about what we will be doing in part 1. We will start by setting up our project, which means creating all the files we need, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and downloading the Fabric.js JavaScript code from the website. Optionally, we can install Lite Server, which allows our browser to automatically refresh when we make changes to our code. Then, we'll start working with the Fabric Canvas class. We will create the element in the template. We will initialize this Fabric Canvas object. We'll briefly talk about what upper and lower canvas is. We'll add a background image, and take a first look at events in the canvas. Let's start by setting up our project. I'm going to create a folder on my desktop for our project, and that's where we will create our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. Okay, so I got the basic file structure set up. You can rename your files however you like, but lib is where we are going to be putting our Fabric JavaScript file. So now we will download this from the website. Okay, so now the Fabric file is downloaded, we just want to place it in our lib folder. Let's start adding what we need into our HTML file. So I'll start by putting a basic template. Now we can add in the script file we created and the Fabric JavaScript file that we added. So now that we have this set up, we should do some basic testing to make sure that these files are linked together. Okay, so this shows us that our HTML file is working. And we can see we get the output I am in index.js. Our index.js file is working. Now this next part is optional, but I am going to install Lite Server. It will pretty much allow me to develop in a more streamlined fashion, meaning I can simply make a change to my code, save, and the changes will be displayed in the browser. So what are we going to do here? First, I'm going to set up a package.json for this project. Now I am going to install Lite Server with the npm install command. Now that Lite Server has been installed, I created a quick npm script for it. This is just added to your package.json file, and I can run this by typing npm run dev. So it automatically opened my browser for me, but as you can see here, it's serving up my web app at this endpoint. Now let's try making a change to this project. And as you can see here, the changes were automatically updated in the browser without me having to refresh. So now let's start by making our actual canvas. We have to give our canvas a unique ID so Fabric.js will know how to identify it in the template. So we will be hooking everything up in our index.js file. We'll start by calling the new canvas constructor, and this will pretty much allow Fabric to create this class instance so we can use the provided methods of Fabric.js. Here we pass in the ID that we created in the template over here, and it must be matching. So let's look at the constructor of the Fabric.js Canvas. It takes in a string. This string is the element to initialize the instance on, which is the ID that we used in the template. Now the other option is options. Options will be a JavaScript object and it will contain options. So what options can we put in here? Pretty much almost any of the options listed, or all of the options listed inside this page. So starting from the top, allow touch scrolling, alt action key, alt selection key, and if you look here, there are a lot of options. Now, it might be overwhelming to scroll through and read everything, but from my experience, it is faster to just go to a tutorial to kind of get the basic idea of what you would want to initialize for Canvas. And for additional things that you're looking to initialize, just using Control F or Google searching can really help with narrowing down which actual properties that you want to set for your canvas. In this case, let's just set the width and height of the canvas. Now we actually want to see our canvas, so a background color might be nice. If we save this file, our page will refresh. But if you look here, we don't see anything on the page. The reason for this is that Canvas has another operation or function that you must call to signify when to actually update the canvas. So it is called render all. If you look here, calling render all will render both the top and the secondary container canvas. Now you might not know what top and secondary container canvas means, but you actually don't even need to know about I'll get into it briefly, but let's just try this out. Okay, so here we can see our Fabric canvas. It is red as we set and 500 by 500. We can confirm this by using the Chrome inspector. And our canvas is 500 by 500. Now let's talk about the lower and upper canvas. If we look here, we see a lower canvas and upper canvas, even though we only defined one in our HTML template. The lower canvas has the actual ID of the canvas element we defined, and the upper canvas just has class upper canvas. What happens is, when we call the Fabric.js constructor on the canvas, it creates this upper canvas for us, and it uses it to handle some things on the Fabric side. Now, these may include handling events or groupings, and I truly don't know the details. And I really don't think you need to. When you interact with Fabric.js, you should pretty much be interacting with this high-level API that they have provided us. It's actually quite extensive, and it saves you the trouble of having to implement very low-level details. Now this red background is kind of harsh, so I want to replace it with something else. So looking on the web, I found a sky background. You can use whichever image you want, but now we're going to use this image and place it in this canvas background. I'm just going to look in this canvas documentation. And quickly I found a property called background image. And background image is of type fabric image. So let's look at the fabric image class. Here is the fabric image class. We can call this new image constructor, and we could have this image object, and we can assign different properties to an image. But let's see how we can get an image from a URL. So we found a function from URL. It's a static function, so we can just call this function from fabric image. And if you see here, it creates a fabric image for us. And there's an optional callback, which will give us the newly created image, since getting the image from the web may not be immediate. And an image options, where we can add options for the image, similar to what we did with the canvas, but with properties like origin X, Y, padding, etc. So we're just going to start using this from URL function in this code. So if we look at the callback, it gives us the image as the first argument. So I could just create a arrow function here to give us this image. Then we can set this image as our background image. So if we remember, these changes won't actually show up until we call the render all function. So we do that here as well. So another thing we should remove is this background color. Oh, spelling this correctly would help. And there you go. Here we have our background image. Now let's clean up our code a little bit. So I want to separate these out into meaningful functions. So for the first function, I think I'm going to make an initialize canvas function. So for the parameters, I'm going to pass in the ID and have this function return the canvas object that is created. Now I can just call this function. So now I can make a function for setting the background image. So here I just pass in the URL that we will be using for the background image. This can actually be a relative or absolute path as well. And I also pass in the canvas object, which we're setting the background to. Okay, so now everything should still work as before. And good. That's exactly what we wanted. So the next thing that I want to talk about is events. This Fabric Canvas class fires all these events. Object modified, object rotated, object scaled, etc. Now, currently we don't have anything in our canvas except this background image, which is technically an object in itself, but we can't really interact with it as it's static and we can't move it around. But there are still some things that we can do. Mouse is up, mouse is down, mouse over, mouse out. So let's try listening to one of these events. Let's create a function for listening to mouse over. So the way I learned about Canvas events the first time was through the tutorial and the demos. So if you look at Canvas's demos and tutorials, it's pretty extensive, and there may be a lot of things such as quadratic curves or stickman that you wouldn't need to touch, but it could be useful if you find something that meets exactly what you're trying to do. When it comes to events, not only for Canvas but for objects as well, which we will talk about in the future, you can just listen to these events by simply saying .on the object. So we're trying to listen to this mouse over event. Now let's set the event listener. It takes in the event as the first parameter, and the second parameter is the listener. I'm just choosing to make the handler inline, but you can do a separate handler for it as well. So here is the canvas, here is the console. As I put the mouse over the canvas, the event fires. We can try this with other events like mouse move, and we can see how this event fires far more than mouse over. Now all these events here on Fabric Object are also available on circle, rectangle, line. This is just a root object class which all the 2D shapes inherit from. So this event alone doesn't do much. Right now we're just printing it. Let's learn more about what Canvas can do so we can react to this event. This concludes part 1 of the tutorial. In the next part of the tutorial, we will learn about panning in the canvas and drawing in the canvas. I plan to have part 2 uploaded within a couple days.